Hello. This is Elf coming from Beamish Crafty Corner. And I've had a few people ask me how to do this with watercolor pencils. So I thought today we could give this a try. I will give you a couple of different techniques that I use and a couple of different tips. And we'll do one of these, just a smaller one. So, a little bit about picking the image. Now, if you copy the image onto a piece of paper with a computer, and you print it out, that's fine. Just make sure that you get, you do it with a printer that doesn't run, okay? So, I have some coloring books. These are adult coloring books. And the weight on the paper on these is about 24 pounds. So, you always want to make sure that you have a good quality paper. Not necessarily as thick as, watercolor paper, but at least something that has some good quality to it. And then you want to pick out an image that's not overly repetitive or that wouldn't be too difficult for you to do. So I like these two right here. These are the Color with Music series. And I think I got these at Walmart a few years back. It comes with a CD of relaxation music, and then it comes with 48 images in here. I believe there's 48 images, and all of the images on here they're relatively small. They're not large, and they're not too terribly detailed. And so for the first one, you do want to pick something that's a little bit bigger. This is the Botanical Garden One, and let's take a look here. So this one is sort of abstract. You have, some large areas that you can work with. So this is probably like an ideal type. Something like this would be an image that you would be ideal to do this with. Okay? I have selected an image. I'm going to do this one right here today. Again, this is about 24-pound paper. So it's pretty thick, and we're going to need some supplies. So the first thing we're going to need is some kind of a paper towel or a rag or something that you can use to dry off your brush. And 3 brushes. You're going to want a 4, a 6, and a 2, and these are watercolor brushes. You can find these at any craft store. Pretty inexpensive. They're not that pricey. If you have a big area, you may want a number 8, which is probably the most common brush for watercolor. And you may want some tiny little detail brushes. Okay? The other thing, whenever you're working with watercolor, you need 2 wells of water. Okay? 2 wells. You want 1 well to use to wet your paint, and then once you've painted, you want a different one to rinse it and clean your brush. To avoid this being terrible, after you've used it, instead of ducking it straight into this water, you could bleed the color off onto your towel, then rinse your brush, then dry your brush and put it back into your paint water, okay? Otherwise, you're going to end up with that mucky brown color. It's not too terribly important when you're using watercolor pencils, but it is more important when you're using regular watercolor. We'll talk about that at another time. But I have 2 sets of watercolor pencils here. The first one is my Fine Touch set, inexpensive. The second jar has the pencils that I have from the UK and my set of Artist Lofts. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of pick colors. Now, when you're doing this and you're working with watercolor, you can't just do the whole thing. You have to kind of pick spots. So I think what I'm going to do to start this is I'm going to work on this leaf right here. And so I'm going to get multiple colors of green so that I can blend this. And I will start with a darker color at the base. And I'm just lightly putting this in. I'm not putting any pressure. And I'm going to go one shade lighter inside here. There's a little piece in the middle. So we'll go a little lighter there. And then I'll take that color and blend out on the points here. Get my hands out of the way so we can all see this. And then I'm going to continue with another green through here. And then out to my lightest shade. Okay, so let's put these aside because we want to keep them out. We don't want to put them away because we may have to come back and add more color. So I'm going to come in to my water. I dab the brush off on the back of my hand. That allows me to have water to pick up later when I need to clean the brush. And I'm going to start between the two colors, blending them together, coming down into the dark and then up into the light. And I'm just going to blend these colors together, going out towards the tips of the leaf. I'm going to do one side and then I'm going to go back and do the other side. Now if I need more water, I still have the water on the back of my hand that I can pick back up. If I need more water, I'm going to wipe my brush, put it in my cleaning water, wipe it again, and go back into my well, dab my water back off, and come back in again. Again, I'm going to start at the base, and I'm going to take that color up. And the more I move the colors, the better they blend. And I'm going to go right to the line. I need more water. I'll go ahead and wipe that off. Wash, pick up clean water. And I'll just kind of move this around till I get the blend that I want. So we end up with this very blended color. So now I'm going to do another portion of this because I'm going to move away from the wet. And I think I'll work on these drops over here. So I'm just going to grab some blues. And let's see. I'm going to add some blue to the bottom, and I'm not going to make these all the same color, so I'm going to move around a little bit. Okay, so I've covered all my water drops, and I've gone through and I've painted them. Now they're wet, so I'm going to let them sit flat and let the paint cool and kind of settle naturally. And as soon as that's done, we're going to come back and I'm going to start working on this flower. We do have some grass down here. It looks like some grass motifs and things that we can put in. And we do have a background that needs to be done. Of course, that would have to be done last because it's really big and it takes up a lot of the page. So we're working on smaller areas first. So we'll either work on the flower or we'll come in and do this. It just depends. These are pretty much dry. These are still wet. But, you know, we can come in and start working in here. So I'm going to start, I think, with this part here. And we'll start getting the rose kind of colored, just to lay in that base color, and then we'll come back in and we'll touch, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and get started putting in the red, and then we'll start activating the paint with the water and see what we get. Okay, so let's say that I want to work on these little outlines here, and I want to do those in a very dark, heavily saturated green. I will pick the color that I want, and it's going to be this one right here. It's just a very dark green. And what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to use a bigger brush for the moment, because I want to get a good fair amount of water, and I'm going to put that on my hand because I'm going to be working from my hand. And I'm using a very tiny little detail brush here. I'm going to come in, get it wet, and then I'm going to touch the color on the pencil. And that's just going to pick the color straight up onto this tiny little detail brush, and then I can come in and I can lay in the shade just like I would with regular watercolor. Put my brush in the water, pick up the paint, and come in and lay that color in. Now, this doesn't work so well for blending, but it does work when I want to lay in a layer of solid color without putting in like dark pencil lines. Instead of getting a heavy line here,
this is my business technical support point in reference to the ticket that was put in by
I can get a relatively good saturation of color.
No, that's fine. I would just want to leave a voicemail or something.
Highly detailing what I want.
From Cox. Another one is
Without putting in what you would traditionally see with a pencil, and that's those heavier lines. Now, this does eat the pencil up, so to speak. Like you may have to sharpen it more frequently. But it's going to allow you to add that deeper color. come over and do this little one here on the edge.
Just advisory that due to the outages that are going on currently, it's difficult to troubleshoot the issues that she's been having. Until those get cleared, then we can continue on troubleshooting the issues that she's reported. Right.
So that is a second way of using your watercolor pencils that's going to allow you
All right. Thank you so much for these.
to have some difference in depth of color. This is wet. Do not put it with your pencils. Leave it to the side for a moment to dry. But it's going to allow you to put this color in here and control the color exactly where you want it to go without having that line that you would traditionally see. Normally, if you were to color in with that depth of color, you'd have to go over it multiple times. And then what ends up happening is when you come back in with the water, you can't move the lines. So you end up with this really big depth of color in the middle, and the line doesn't really move. And it doesn't matter how much water you put on this or how much you move it around, you're still going to end up with that solid color in the center. So this is a way of avoiding that. Okay? Again, I'm going to go ahead and let this dry for a few minutes, and then we'll come back and work on some other areas. Okay, so I finished all of the lines out, and I've come in and I've added some color to the fold out on the leaves here. And I'm actually using a little bit of like an orange color so that I can give it a little bit of difference. So what I'm going to do is just color this in. Just move the color around here. And this is sort of where the rose petal would open. So I want it to have a little bit of a differential color. Just going to fill these, move that color around, and I'm using that very detailed little brush that I have, the tiniest little tip. And I have some tiny little areas here to do. So this allows me to move that color into those little tiny areas without going over. Color in the lines. Probably would have been the one reason I failed kindergarten, right? I'm sorry, ma'am, but she doesn't color in the lines. Alright, so now I have all of those done. And I'm going to let this dry, and then I will come back and we're going to start laying color into that bigger section of the rose. Okay, so we're now going to get started here adding color, and I want to really get this brush well and clean because I've used this dark green, and so now I want to make sure that I get it so I don't get any green here. And let's get some of that green off my hand if possible. All right, we'll just move. Let's find a new spot. Here's a good spot. All right, so I have some water, and I've got this all colored in, and I'm going to actually start kind of on the outside, moving in, because I want to keep the lighter color there without blending it into the dark color too much. So I'll start at the outside of my petals and work my way in. Okay, so now we're going to work a little bit on these other leaves that you see in here, and we're just going to kind of make those a little bit more distinct. So I'm going to be using a couple of shades of green here. And we'll start down in this area because I don't want to touch what I just put down. All right, so we're about as close down as we can get, and I want you to see just literally how juvenile the coloring is here. It's literally just scribbled in, okay? So we're going to come over here, and I'm going to start kind of at the top and work my way down. So let me get this into frame so you can see where I'm at right here. Okay, so all I'm going to do is just move that color. And as I move that color, it starts to blend together. Now I put the blue on in there, so there's already blue on here, so I want to be careful not to go too deeply into those areas because I can reactivate the paint, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to move this green color, this very juvenile, easily laid in, blend this all together. Adding more water to my brush as needed. And just moving from one place to another. Moving all of this green together. We'll come up here and we'll get some of this. Just going to blend those greens together. And the color intensity stays intense in some areas, and in other areas it just goes very, very transparent. So I'm able to kind of move that color around a little bit, and it allows me to create some shading and some contrast between the dark and the light. Again, we're just coming in, pushing the color into the position that I want it, and just moving it gently, mixing it together as I go. And just covering these huge areas with this color and allowing it to kind of flow naturally together, creating all of those highlights and lowlights. So you can see where we now create this blending. And if you have an area like this where it seems to be a little too rough, you can always just add a little more water, come back and move that paint just a little bit more and lighten that up. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and finish kind of doing the rest of this, and then we'll be back to start working on the rest. Alright, so I finished coloring in and blending all of the green, and I tried to keep it lighter towards the center and darker towards the outside so your eye is drawn in. And then I went ahead and I just put some color in up here, and I haven't quite blended it yet. And I'm using two colors here. The first of which is like a cherry red, and then the second is this gold color. And it just really pops, and so I want to see how that works on these, on the outside of this petal here. So, you know, let's see what we get. So I'm just going to pop the yellow and blend it into the red. So now we're going to, we have two pieces left. We have the stem, and then we have the background. And so what I want to do here is I want to come in and I want to put in a more concentrated color in the stem. And so again, I'm going to go back to the technique, of picking up the color directly from the watercolor pencil. So I want this to be very concentrated color. And then we're going to go with the outside color. And I'm using kind of an orangey green here, like a yellowy green. And I'm doing that to complement the yellow that I've added, the gold I added into the rose petal. And I'm going to come back down and just do this little piece here on the outside. Excuse me. Do this little piece on the outside. Again, with a very strong concentration of color. And then we're going to hit that actual stem. And this is like a blue-green. And I'm using that because I have to try and differentiate the stem from all the green around it. So very thick, very heavy concentration of color here. Alright, so for the top piece here, I'm going to be using one of these micro misters.
And I'm sorry, I didn't quite get your name on it again.
And I'm going to put a little bit of water on here. Now, it's going to obviously touch the rest of my piece here, so I want to work quickly. Then I'm going to take my pencil at a bit of an angle, and I'm just going to begin to lay color. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to put more color than normal. So by having the paper a little bit wet, it's going to take a little bit more of the color off of the paint, off the pencil. I'm going to go with a few shades here of yellow. then I'm going to bring in some
Yeah, no, it's just it was
light orange. Let me find the one I want. It's right here. We're going to bring in a little bit of orange. Now, normally when you watercolor, you will add water to the paper before you begin to color, and this just helps me get a little bit more on here. I'm going to be using a larger brush. So this is my number 6. Get it wet. I'm going to take off a lot of that water on my hand, and then I'm just going to start moving some color. I'm going to be real careful to take my brush up to the edge of the other colors, but not to breach that black line. Because now I'm working with wet colors. All my colors are sort of wet now, because I just sprayed water on them. And I don't want to pull like the blue in, because then I'll just end up with mucky green, and I don't want to do that. We just want to add a hint of color. Into the background. This is not an excessive amount of color. This is literally a hint of color. And so what this does is it allows me to have a lot of color on here that I can move. And I can move it a lot easier. And any place that I want to go back in and add more color, I can again use my wet brush. Big brush thins the paper, thins the paint. Because it holds more water. Lots of water, wetter brush, better movement of color. Lots of water, very wet brush, lots of movement. Water on paper helps the watercolor to move. Because it's watercolor.
correct. This one in particular is Time Warner. Trying to get into our
All right, set this one to the side because it's really wet. All right, ladies, there it is, finished. So we basically, we went from a dark color to a light color to draw your eye in, and then up and out into a brighter color, again, to draw the eye in that direction. Everything is colored in. Everything's been blended. If there's any place that I want to maybe blend a little more, all I have to do is just take my brush, get it wet, and I can come back in and touch any area that maybe I want to lighten the color a little bit or blend it a little more, because this color will not set for a little while. So I can just kind of blend this out a little bit if I want to, if there's any, rough spots that I don't like. Maybe I want to gentle out a ridge or something, and I can just do that by adding a little bit of a wet paintbrush to it and just going back over it and blending those colors in a little bit better. So, still a little bit of a work to do, but that's the basics of how I do my watercolor with the watercolored pencils and how I get my blends. So if you have any questions, put them in the description box below for me, or reach out to me on Facebook, either way, or just email me and I will get back to you as quick as possible. That's it, ladies. That's all I have for you. Until the next time, do me a favor, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like me, ring my bell, and share me with all your friends. Till the next time, bye-bye.